Tessa loved the stillness of the museum when it first opened its doors in the morning. The sunlight crept through the tall windows and spread across the dark wood floors, lighting up dusty corners and reflecting softly off glass display cases. She'd been volunteering at the Golden Grove Historical Museum for just over a year. After all that time, she had grown accustomed to the hush of the lobby like a gentle welcome into another world, one teeming with relics, stories, and sometimes secrets. That Tuesday was no different. Tessa arrived early, letting herself in with the volunteer badge that doubled as a key card. She signed in at the front desk, a large oak counter that looked just as old as some of the exhibits. Mr. Buckley, the security guard, waved at her from his post via one of the many newly installed cameras. It gave Tessa a slight jolt to see her reflection in the monitor, but she settled her nerves quickly and went about her routine. She headed toward the north wing, a bright open area that housed the museum's rotating exhibits. Her latest responsibility was putting up placards and ensuring each display was tidy and labeled correctly so that docents could run their tours without confusion. Glass enclosed the smaller antiquities, but the larger pieces stood on pedestals or behind roped sections. Everything felt routine. Open the glass case, double-check the artifact, confirm the label, dust around it, lock up again. She worked her way from one pedestal to another, losing herself in her usual sense of wonder at how objects with such history could stand in so unassuming a town. Golden Grove wasn't exactly a bustling metropolis, but it prided itself on a close-knit community and a very well-maintained historical museum, and that was largely due to the dedicated staff who worked under the watchful eye of the curator, Gerald Oberman. That morning, Tessa approached the newest exhibit, one that purported to focus on local legends and lore. She spotted a small figurine resting on a carved wooden stand. A new label had been affixed, 17th century ceremonial carving. It was a small stone sculpture with the shape of a mythical creature, perhaps a bird with outstretched wings. Tessa stopped, the dusting rag in her hand momentarily forgotten. Something about the artifact didn't match the label. She recalled seeing an object very much like this in a different display a few months earlier, but that older item had been from an 18th century Spanish expedition. It had been an item made of granite, whereas this one seemed more like soapstone. Also, it was much smaller than the label's indicated measurements. She hesitated. This might be a case of the label being placed incorrectly. Tessa shrugged and moved on, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. After finishing the tasks in the north wing, she wandered into the back offices where Linda, the museum archivist, usually could be found on the computer, updating the official records. "Hey, Linda," Tessa greeted. She settled into the seat across from Linda's desk. "Did we acquire some new figurine for the local lore exhibit?" Linda took off her reading glasses and blinked. "We get new items all the time, but let me check." She spun her chair around to face the computer screen and clicked through a few files. "Let's see. We have a record for a 17th century carving, but it's flagged as provenance pending. That means the museum's still waiting to fully authenticate it." "That's normal, right?" Tessa said, leaning forward with interest. Linda shrugged. "Usually, yes, but it's unusual to display it as 100% authentic if we haven't completed the documentation. I see a note that it was donated by," she squinted at the screen, "an anonymous benefactor." The revelation tickled Tessa's curiosity. She realized her shift was nearly over, but she made a mental note to keep that artifact in mind. Something about it mislabeled or not bothered her more than she could explain. Tessa spent the remainder of her shift directing a few elderly visitors around the museum's Civil War section. When they were gone, and after Linda had departed for the day, Tessa lingered. The museum was closing soon, but she walked back to the north wing to take another look at the figurine. Luckily, no visitors were around, so she had the display to herself. The small bird-like statue sat under a warm light, seeming to glisten at its edges. She noticed faint scratches on the stone surface that looked like they might have been from a tool used to remove inscriptions. That was odd. Why would someone try to erase or modify the markings? She snapped a few photos of the artifact on her phone just for reference, she reasoned. She'd look it up online or see if there were any matching items in old records. By the time she was done, the overhead lights flickered, a sign from Mr. Buckley that the museum was entering after-hours mode. Gathering her belongings, she hurried out. Over dinner at home, Tessa's mind kept returning to the figurine. She pictured the jagged lines along its wings, the uneven hue of the stone. If she recalled properly, soapstone artifacts from the Spanish era were not typical in that shape. She spent an hour online, but came up dry in identifying any direct matches. She scribbled down a list of search terms: 17th century, soapstone bird figurine, Golden Grove artifact as his mislabeled museum piece. Nothing conclusive surfaced. The next day, Tessa arrived at the museum with renewed focus, determined to do more thorough research. She squeezed in some time before her shift to talk to Linda again, but the archivist's desk was vacant. An out-of-commission note indicated Linda would be gone to the county records department until the following day. Tessa decided she might find something in the museum's own basement storage. Normally, only staff with specific clearance went into the basement archives, but Tessa had been helping Linda reorganize old crates down there for the last few weeks. Linda had shown her the sign-in key and the proper procedure. With Linda gone for the day, Tessa decided to slip down after she completed her volunteering duties. By late afternoon, once the strollers, families, and the occasional school group cleared out, Tessa headed to the staff door leading into the basement. She signed her name on the log as required, stepped under the bare fluorescent lighting that buzzed faintly overhead, and began scanning the shelves. Most boxes were carefully labeled with either a date range or content category. She recognized the code for Spanish colonial artifacts, SC, followed by a series of numbers. Because the new figurine was labeled as 17th century, Tessa figured that would fall under the Spanish colonial period for this region. She ran her finger along a row of folders, the cardboard spines dotted with typed numbers. Her eyes caught SC 1703, which matched one of the partial numbers Linda had read from her computer yesterday. She carefully slid the folder from the shelf. Inside were old photographs, typed notes from historians, and a chain of custody form for an artifact described as a soapstone figurine of indeterminate origin. This was accompanied by a black and white photograph of a bird-like statue. But the date typed in the record was not 17th century. It was listed as 18th century, with question marks indicating uncertain provenance. In the margin, someone had scrawled, "Likely Aztec in Prim or a Spanish knockoff, not proven, possibly a forgery?" Tessa frowned. This definitely contradicted the display label. She read further. Acquired from private estate sale, documentation incomplete. The name Edwin Carlyle popped up in the chain of custody notes as the previous owner. Vague references indicated he might have connections to illicit trading of antiquities. Another odd note had been penciled in at the bottom. Under revision, do not display. But that original directive had clearly been ignored. The label in the museum now stated a confident 17th century date, as though thoroughly authenticated. Tessa felt an uneasy prickle run along her arms. Why would the museum put out an artifact that its own records labeled as questionable? She tucked the folder under her arm and decided to check the staff lounge, where sometimes she could find Mr. Obermann. As the curator, he was the final authority on what items made it to display. Perhaps he had discovered new information that legitimized the figurine's origin. Yet something about the mention of forgery, illicit trading, and anonymous benefactor rattled her enough that she wanted answers right away. She found him exactly where she hoped, in the staff lounge, nursing an espresso from the fancy coffee machine the museum board had splurged on last year. Gerald Obermann was a tall man with salt and pepper hair, combed immaculately to one side. He wore a navy blazer over a crisp white shirt, and as soon as Tessa stepped in, he offered a courteous, if guarded, smile. "Good afternoon, Tessa," he said, glancing at the folder in her hands. "Busy as always, I see." "Yes, sir." She felt a pang of nerves. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I've been going through the records and I noticed this artifact on display, the soapstone figurine in the north wing. I wanted to ask about it." He raised an eyebrow. "Ask away." Tessa carefully opened the file, laying out some of the old notes. "We have it labeled as 17th century, but the museum records don't confirm that. In fact, it was flagged as questionable. Yet we're displaying it like it's confirmed." Obermann's face tensed. "Where did you find those notes?" "In the basement archives," Tessa replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "I know that usually you or Linda supervise the archives, but I was worried about a labeling error. I didn't want the public to be misled." He gave her a tight smile. "I appreciate your concern, but I recently received new information about that item's authenticity. The old records are out of date." With a flick of his wrist, he closed the folder. "We sometimes make decisions based on fresh data. That's all there is to it." Tessa sensed a note of finality in his tone, but she pressed on. "If you don't mind my asking, what new data did we get?" He glanced at her with a trace of impatience. "A private expert verified its origin. He insisted it was from the earlier Spanish colonial period. We're still waiting on the official paperwork, but in the meantime I decided it was too important not to share with our visitors." She nodded slowly. "I see. Thank you for clarifying." "Of course," he said. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have some business to attend to in my office." He tucked the folder under his arm and walked out without another word. Tessa's heart thudded. There was something in Obermann's demeanor that felt too guarded, as if her questions had unsettled him more than he let on. A hush lingered in the lounge after he left. The next day, Tessa arrived for her volunteer shift to find that the figurine had been removed from its display. The pedestal was empty, rope stanchions in place, but no small bird statue. A new label read, "Under restoration, temporarily removed." Tessa's curiosity flared into genuine alarm. She headed to the basement's storage, but the folder she had found before was missing from the archives shelf. When she checked the sign-in log, she found no note of it being officially removed. That struck her as odd, because Lyndon was usually meticulous about documenting any changes. Feeling uneasy, Tessa decided to confide in Ned Buckley, the kindly security guard. He had worked at the museum for years and had always seemed fiercely loyal to the institution. She approached him at the front desk near the cameras, hoping he might have some insight. "Buckley," she said in a hushed tone, "did you notice anything strange last night, after closing?" He looked at her curiously. "Strange how?" "Someone removed an artifact from the north wing. I'm just wondering if maybe you saw something on the security cameras." The guard gave a thoughtful nod. "I remember Mr. Obermann staying late. He said he was finishing some paperwork, but that's not unusual. I didn't physically see him take anything out, but he walked through the corridor carrying a locked case. I assumed it was just some routine transport." A locked case. Tessa suspected it contained the figurine, and that suggested Obermann was moving it quietly and covertly. She leaned in closer. "If you have a chance, could you keep an eye on the cameras, or let me know if you see him doing anything else suspicious?" Buckley gave her a serious look. "I can watch. But do remember, Tessa, he's the curator. He has the authority to move pieces in and out. Just because it's unusual doesn't mean it's suspicious." "Yes, but—" She hesitated. "There's a chance it was mislabeled on purpose, or that it's stolen. The museum's records indicate it might be from an illicit source." Buckley's eyes widened. "That's a big claim." "I know," she said, "but I can't ignore the evidence." He pursed his lips. "If you want my advice, talk to Linda when she's back. She keeps all the records. If something fishy is going on, she'll have caught wind of it. In the meantime, keep your ear to the ground." Tessa thanked him, feeling somewhat reassured. She spent the rest of the day helping with a group of high school students on a field trip, though her mind was miles away, trying to piece together the puzzle. By closing time, Linda still hadn't returned. That evening, Tessa found herself reading every local news article she could find on stolen artifacts. Obscure mention popped up in a local blog about a break-in at a small private collector's estate near Golden Grove 3 months earlier. The item stolen, a small stone statuette depicting a mythical bird. The blog post didn't name the victim explicitly, nor did it confirm the origins of the piece. Tessa's pulse pounded at the possibility that the museum's newly displayed figurine could be that stolen artifact. Early the next morning, Tessa decided that if Linda wasn't back, she would approach Mr. Obermann directly again. Lying in bed, though, Tessa worried, what if Obermann was the one trying to cover something up? He would obviously refuse to implicate himself. Maybe she needed more evidence before confronting him. Her thoughts circled around until she finally drifted to sleep, only to wake early and head to the museum once again. She arrived well before her shift and signed in. The museum was still closed to the public, but staff had begun their daily tasks. The corridors echoed with footsteps on hard floors. Tessa wandered discreetly toward the curator's office, passing a couple of staff officers along the way. Window blinds hid the interior of Obermann's space. Expensive paintings lined the hallway, but Tessa barely gave them a glance. She was too fixated on the question of how to see for herself if the soapstone figurine was there. She almost jumped out of her skin when the door behind her flew open. Out stepped Mr. Obermann, quickly locking the door. He looked startled to see her so near. "Oh, Tessa, you're here early," he remarked in a friendly tone, but his eyes flickered with caution. She forced a neutral smile. "Yes, I'm scheduled to help prepare the gallery for a class visit." He gave a small nod, slipping his keys into his pocket. "Excellent. I'll be heading to a meeting with the board soon." Tessa saw a small ring on his desk, just visible through the partly open door. A ring of keys. The museum's master set. Before she could gather her thoughts, Obermann slipped into the hallway and shut the door fully behind him, presumably having locked it. She watched him disappear around the corner. She exhaled, adrenaline surging. If she was going to confirm her suspicions, now might be her only chance to see inside his office without him hovering. She waited, her heart pounding, until she was sure he was gone. Then she quietly approached the door. She tried the handle, locked of course, but she had an idea. She remembered Mr. Buckley once stored a spare key in the security office for emergencies. She hurried down the corridor, hoping Buckley would still be there. He was reviewing the schedule for the day. "Hi, Buckley," she said, trying to keep her tone light. "Mr. Obermann locked me out of his office, but he asked me to grab an item from his desk." She forced a smile she hoped wasn't too transparent. "He must have forgotten to leave the door open. Any chance I can borrow the spare?" Buckley's brow furrowed. "He didn't mention it to me." Tessa dug deep for a believable explanation. "I'm sure it was just an oversight. I can be quick about it." He gazed at her with earnest eyes. "You seem a bit tense. Are you certain this is legitimate?" She felt a pang of guilt. "I'm sorry to put you in a tough spot." "Listen, I suspect Obermann is hiding something. There's a figurine that might be stolen, and I need to see if it's in his office." Buckley hesitated, eyes shifting to the row of camera monitors. Finally, he unlocked a drawer and slid out a small key ring. "You're placing real trust in me, Tessa." "I'll try to help, but we have to be quick. Make sure no one sees. If this blows up, I'll have to explain everything to the board." Tessa nodded, swallowing a nervous lump in her throat. She took the spare key from him and darted back to Obermann's office. Pausing to check that the corridor was empty. It was. She slipped the key into the lock and turned it clicked. She entered swiftly, making sure to close and lock the door behind her. The office was immaculately organized. On the wall hung a framed certificate naming Obermann as curator. A few leather-bound books sat on a shelf, volumes of art history, local archaeology, museum ethics. Tessa found the large mahogany desk at the center, its surface neatly arranged with a laptop, a small lamp, notepads, and a scattering of old coins in a glass dish. She opened one drawer, mostly files for budgets, exhibit brochures. Another drawer held stationery and business cards. She tried the file cabinet near the window, rummaging through manila folders. She skimmed through titles: pending acquisitions, restoration requests, board meeting minutes. Then she saw a folder labeled Spanish Colonial. Opening it, Tessa found paperwork about the figurine's donation. It was stamped with a big red anonymous. The next page was a typed letter referencing a private arrangement. Tessa's heart pounded faster. The letter suggested that the piece had been acquired under questionable terms and that Obermann was arranging a hush-hush way of legitimizing it under the museum's name. A loud thud echoed from the hallway. Tessa's adrenaline spiked. She slid the letter into her backpack, figuring it was vital evidence. As she pushed the cabinet shut, she noticed a sealed wooden crate shoved behind a coat rack in the corner. She approached carefully and saw that it was unmarked except for a shipping label with no return address. A museum shipping label typically had a sender, or at least a date. She tried the lid loose enough to lift. Inside, Tessa's gaze landed on the soapstone figurine, carefully wrapped in protective foam. She gently lifted the statue. Yes, it was the same bird-like shape, the same faint scratches where someone had removed inscriptions. This had to be the stolen artifact. The evidence was overwhelming. A suspicious donation letter, a missing artifact, contradictory museum records. A pounding knock on the office door made her jump. She nearly dropped the figurine. "Tessa, are you in there?" Buckley's muffled voice came through the door, tense and urgent. "Obermann is on his way back. Hurry." With shaking hands, Tessa replaced the figurine in the crate and closed the lid. She sprinted to the door, quietly unlocked it, and slipped out into the hallway. Buckley grabbed her arm, pressing a finger to his lips, then motioned for her to follow him. They hurried down a side corridor. She caught sight of Obermann's silhouette approaching from the opposite end. "Out the back door," Buckley whispered. "Now!" The two of them emerged in a quiet parking lot behind the museum. Tessa panted from the nerve-wracking scramble. Buckley looked at her intently. "Did you find what you suspected?" She nodded, opening her backpack to show him the letter. "It's all here. He's covering up an artifact that was likely stolen. I read a blog about a break-in at a private collector's estate. This might be the same figurine. We need to contact the authorities, or at least the board, before Obermann can move it again." Buckley's face was grave. "But we need to be certain. We can't just accuse the curator. This could ruin his career if we're wrong." "Look at these documents," Tessa insisted, half opening the fold. "He even wrote about a private arrangement. It indicates hush money or something along those lines." Buckley clenched his jaw. "Then let's talk to Linda. She's back today, I heard. She'll know how to handle this. She can confirm the authenticity or connect us to the rightful owner. But we can't keep these papers from her. She'll need them." Tessa nodded. She felt her heart pounding in a mix of relief that someone believed her and fear about what they were getting themselves into. With the folder tucked under her arm, she and Buckley headed back inside, careful to avoid Obermann's path. Linda had just returned from her county records trip. They found her at her desk, sorting through a stack of documents. She looked surprised when Tessa and Buckley arrived, both visibly tense. "What's going on?" Linda asked. Tessa and Buckley quickly explained. Linda scanned the acquired letter, reading with wide eyes. "This is serious. I have the contact information for the estate that was robbed. We were actually informed about that break-in. I recall one of the items rumored stolen was a small bird statuette. I was never given the full details, but let me check my old emails." She clicked through her inbox, then turned the screen to Tessa and Buckley. An old email chain from the estate's attorney listed the stolen piece as a rare soapstone figurine with a distinctive bird design, and it specifically mentioned Spanish colonial influences. Linda slapped her desk. This must be it. Obermann's name is nowhere in these emails, but that's no surprise if he facilitated the donation privately through a third party. Buckley let out a low whistle. So the curator was planning to pass it off as a legitimate find? Linda nodded, appalled. He might have planned to keep it on display just long enough to establish public acceptance, then claim it as museum property, effectively laundering it so it seemed legit. By the time the rightful owner realized what had happened, the artifact would be sold or exchanged. Tessa felt her knees weakening. We have to call the estate. Or the authorities. Linda grabbed her phone. The estate's attorney is listed right here. I'll call them first and gather the evidence. They can contact the authorities directly if they choose to press charges. Within 10 minutes, Linda had finished explaining the situation over the phone. She turned back to Tessa and Buckley, exhaling a long breath. They're sending a representative tomorrow with legal documents. They want to confirm the figurine's identity. They're also going to involve the local police. We have more than enough to suspect theft, Buckley frowned. What if Obermann tries to hide or move the statuette? Tessa lifted the letter. We can put it under lock and key, or the board could intervene. As soon as they arrive, we can lead them to the figurine in Obermann's office. Evidence is all over his logs, though we'll have to be quick. He might catch wind. Linda typed up a quick email to the museum board chair, CCing Tessa and Buckley. She explained the situation vaguely, focusing on the need for an immediate review of the figurine's provenance. The three of them prepared for a confrontation that day. However, to their surprise, Obermann never appeared again that afternoon. Rumors circulated he had left the building for a lunch meeting, but he never returned. Tessa had an uneasy feeling that he suspected something was up. The next day, though, the estate's representative arrived, accompanied by a plainclothes detective. Buckley let them in. They greeted Tessa, Linda, and a couple of board members who'd shown up to handle the crisis. Tessa led them to Obermann's office, Linda brandishing the spare key that Buckley had retrieved once more. Inside, the group found the wooden crate untouched in the corner. The detective carefully opened it, revealing the figurine. The representative studied it intensely, referencing old photographs and verifying the piece through distinctive markings on its underside. It's the one, he said, a mixture of relief and anger in his voice. Our client has been searching for this piece since the robbery. Moments later, Obermann appeared in the doorway, caught off guard by the group. He paused, looking pale. The detective introduced himself calmly. A hush fell over the room as the estate representative explained the official claim that this was stolen property. Obermann sputtered, trying to deny responsibility, but Tessa gently showed him the letter and the museum's own contradictory records. Cornered, Obermann attempted an explanation, some nonsense about an anonymous donor, a misunderstanding. But the evidence was too strong. The detective took notes, prepared to file a formal report. The board member stepped in, relieving Obermann of duty on the spot pending an investigation. Tessa felt a swirl of emotions. Sadness that the museum's respected curator had fallen to dishonest tactics, but also relief that the artifact would be returned to its rightful owner. Later in the staff lounge, Linda gave Tessa a warm hug. "You did the right thing," she said. "You're sharp, Tessa. I'm just sorry you had to learn about betrayal the hard way." Buckley joined them, placing a comforting hand on Tessa's shoulder. "This museum is lucky you paid attention to that mislabeled artifact. Who knows how long he's been doing shady deals behind the scenes?" Tessa smiled, small tears pricking her eyes. Despite the unpleasantness of the situation, she felt a surge of pride in having upheld the integrity of the museum she loved. "Thank you. I just want to make sure that Golden Grove's history, and any history really, remains honest." The board quickly arranged for an interim curator, ensuring day-to-day operations wouldn't suffer. That afternoon, Tessa resumed her usual volunteer tasks, sorting new labels for the next exhibit, but this time with renewed purpose in every word she typed. She might just be a volunteer, but her dedication to truth and curiosity had preserved the museum's integrity. As she straightened a display of Civil War artifacts, she overheard a few visitors talking about rumors of a scandal in the museum. Tessa winced at the thought, knowing gossip would swirl for a while. Yet she took some comfort in the knowledge that the rightful owners would have their artifact back, and a more transparent administration would guide the museum. Before her shift ended, Tessa paused at the empty pedestal in the north wing. Yellow caution tape blocked the area, a sign that the display was now off limits, pending further investigation. Where the soapstone figurine had once stood was just a bare surface, illuminated by the overhead lights. She considered everything that had happened. Her initial suspicion, her research in the basement archives, the stolen letters, and the hush-hush donation. Despite the turmoil, a small smile touched her lips, reflecting on the importance of her role in uncovering the truth. Not everything is as it seems, Tessa whispered to herself. Especially not the artifacts that find their way into places they don't belong. With that, she pulled the rope barrier aside so a janitor could pass through, then made her way toward the exit. The museum might have lost its curator, but Tessa felt a fresh optimism stirring. If one person's secret could threaten the museum's reputation, another person's determination could save it. As she stepped out of the high, echoing corridors into the sunlit lobby, Tessa promised herself she would remain vigilant. Golden Grove's museum had many more stories to tell, and she intended to ensure every one of them was told with honesty and care.